This Quoircast Podcast episode is brought to you by Returning to Eden, a field guide for the spiritual journey. Returning to Eden is a book by Heather Hamilton for people who resonate with aspects of Christianity, but struggle with the coherence of its claims. After having a mystical experience that shattered her evangelical beliefs, Heather Hamilton found herself on the journey that every true spiritual seeker ultimately takes. The highest truths that set us free are hidden in places that most people are not looking. Returning to Eden re-examines the Bible stories of childhood and opens them up as symbolic maps into the inner world. Stories like Jonah and the whale, the parting of the Red Sea, Noah's Ark, and the virgin birth are illuminated with penetrating depth and intellectual integrity. Faith is no longer a white-knuckled grip on implausible beliefs, but a relaxation into a deep inner knowing. You can purchase Returning to Eden by Heather Hamilton at Amazon.com or at returningtoeden.com.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney.
All right. Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Nat Turney. I'm with my brother John. Say hi, John.
Hi, John.
What people don't know is that you and I are in our 50s now, right? But when we were kids, we went through there was a stretch of time where we watched a lot of old TV. Remember that? And so I don't know what it was. There was a magical time where like late at night on this one channel, we got to watch Jack Benny, Burns and Allen, all kinds of really cool stuff. And I always loved that from Burns and Allen. Like, hi, Gracie. That was the best. I love that. So I'm not sure what that has to do with anything. I'm just like to let our guests know right off the bat that this is how things are going to go.
Yeah.
Like there is no train of thought. There is a meandering trail of thought. So anyway, this is the podcast. This is not church, because if it were church, you'd have left by now. We all know that to be true. Or maybe if you were searching for something better, you'd be like, hey, this is cool. I like these guys. We are joined today by Kendana Kay, and we're going to read you a little bit about her. She comes to us through our good friend, Meg Calvin. Cheers for Meg Calvin. Hey. We love Meg. She's good people. I've got a short little bio to read, and then we're just going to jump head first into a conversation that we hope will meander and also be awesome. So here we go. Kendana Kay. See, I already messed it up.
Kendana.
I just gave you a new name, though. Kendana. In case you ever branch out. Kendana Kay is a relationship coach who facilitates breakthroughs for those exhausted and disappointed from not experiencing the relational joy they crave. She's a veteran worship leader, musician, and licensed minister. Kendana has earned certifications in Elijah House and Apostates inner healing modalities, as a health coach, and as a John Maxwell team speaker, trainer, and coach. She is the mother of 10 children. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Bless your heart. And has been homeschooling for over 35 years. Her husband of 38 years, Johnny, passed away in 2021. Our condolences on that. Kendana lives in Olathe. I asked you and I still messed it up. Olathe. Mercy. John, at some point, you're going to take these reading of the bios over, right?
No, because I'm worse.
Kansas. She lives in Kansas, okay? Where she continues to homeschool her 2 youngest children. You can connect with her at KendanaKay.com, which, by the way, we will have all of those things in the show notes, so don't worry about getting written down now. But welcome to the podcast. Kendana, how are you today?
Hey, it's so good to be here. I'm so excited to have a conversation with you. Thanks so much.
Man, we're happy to have you. Any friend of Meg's is a friend of ours. So
I feel the same.
Yeah, she's like I said, she's good people. I'll ask you some other questions, but did Meg help you through the writing process of your book, or will she help you with marketing or some other things? I know she does a variety of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she worked with me pretty much from start to finish.
Okay, yeah, I found her to be particularly helpful in the role of therapist. That's what I told her about halfway through the writing process of my book. I was like, you know what? You're like equal parts therapist and writing coach, I think. I mean, there's been as much help up here as there has been anywhere. But so great. If you wouldn't mind, one of our routine questions that we ask folks, if they don't mind sharing, is just to give us a little bit of your background, a little bit of your religious upbringing, if there is any. Just kind of give us a snapshot of that story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, well, I grew up in the church. I would be 5th generation Nazarene if I were still in the Nazarene church.
Oh, wow.
So I grew up very much immersed in church and singing and playing and involved with music. I went to a Nazarene college, had kind of a crisis in the Nazarene college, and convoluted, ended up leaving the Nazarene Church and into like deep dive into the charismatic movement. Here in Kansas City, it was called the Kansas City Prophets. So we were right at the very front end of that was when I was in college and kind of rode the wave of that. And it also leading worship and involved in the prophetic ministry and all of that. Then we kind of had a church implosion, and it was pretty traumatic. We pulled back out of the church, and we were not in church for a number of years. I'm back in a church, still independent, but not as charismatic, maybe a little bit more middle of the road right now in terms of, And I felt like I had something to say in writing the book because culturally we were right on that wave with the Kansas City Prophets and with even like with worship, switching from like analog to digital and the whole worship, contemporary Christian worship music becoming a genre of its own. In the 80s, it wasn't a genre.
Yeah, right? It was just church music.
Right. Choruses,
which we sang repeatedly ad nauseum.
Right.
Yeah, I remember those days very well. John and I used to take turns working the overhead, not the projector, but the overhead.
Yes, exactly. On the transparency,
right? Of course, as the deer panted. Oh, Sweats, of course, that's yeah, I know all those songs.
Yeah, all the John Wimber.
Yeah. Tons and tons. So, but it was, you're right. Nobody got in their car and went like, man, I'm going to plug in that latest As the Deer song, man. I like the remix they did. So,
right.
Anyway. Sorry. We digress. So you rode that wave a little bit, and then did you kind of come full circle around out of that, or was that kind of another place of departure for you?
Well, the implosion with the church was certainly a place of departure, a real crisis of faith, a crisis of faith in people for sure.
For sure. Yeah.
And kind of, where do I fit in the kingdom of God and in the body of Christ? And kind of working through that. And the whole process of forgiveness and healing and, it was quite traumatic.
Yeah,
actually.
For sure. Yeah, I've been through a couple of those church implosions, and they are messy, to say the least. And they leave a lot of bodies in their wake. But so in Kansas City though, so is that what evolved into, or was that a completely separate thing with like the Christian, like the International House of Prayer and that thing that kind of took off? Are those things related?
Yes.
Okay.
So Mike Bickle came in the early 80s. We were kind of part of Mike Bickle, South Kansas City Fellowship, the Solemn Assembly. We were one of the multi-campuses with Kansas City House of Prayer.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And then it came under Vineyard and John Wimber. And at that point, organizationally, Olathe campus pulled out and became independent. And we were no longer directly affiliated with Mike Bickle. So then the whole House of Prayer happened. We were like one step removed. Gotcha.
And where did that implosion take place then? Was that on the House of Prayer side or on
the back end? On the back end. It had nothing to do with Mike Bickle and House of Prayer. It was on the Olathe independent.
Gotcha. Okay. Just curious, just getting my logistics in a row. I don't know much about IHOP and Mike Bickle. I know the name, and I have my own particular axis to grind with large movements like that. But that being said, you also in the same neck of, so you're in Kansas City. We said Kansas City, but Olathe. Everybody who knows Kansas large City cities knows that Kansas City is going to be spread out. So Brian Zahn has his church up in St. Joseph, which is north of Kansas City, right? And
yes.
It's kind of like my son tells everyone when he lived in he's like, he lives in Houston. No, he doesn't. He lives in Spring, which is 35 miles north, but it's Houston. Yeah, it's interesting. It was interesting because Brian Zahn's one of my early sort of guides out of fundamentalism,
Mm-hmm.
And then one of the earlier things I saw him in was a series of debates that he had done, and it was hosted at International House of Prayer. Mike Bickle kind of mediated.
Oh, nice. Mm-hmm.
And it was I didn't realize they had a relationship, and they do. I'm not sure, it might be strained at times, but they have a relationship, and especially when he was, doing a 3 or 4 part debate on, penal substitution and, calling the God that's, calling it the death of the monster God or something like that. So it was a great debate. But anyway, all of that is a digress. See, that should be the tagline, John. Welcome to This Is Not Church, ... we digress. But it's cool because I digressed so much. I didn't even mention, and I'm sorry for this, I didn't mention the title of the book. We just keep saying the book as though people know what we're talking about. So you wrote a book called Kissing with Eyes Wide Open. It was released in November. It's available on that place that we won't name. No, I'm just kidding. It's on Amazon.
Right.
We have to come to terms with the devil we know in the publishing world and what it takes to get your book out there. But so would you mind telling us a little what's the book about? How's that for a thought-provoking question, John? Did you like that?
What's the book about?
Remember, I want to do an entire interview one time like Chris Farley does on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah.
You know, he's like, remember when you wrote that book? Remember? That was awesome. So every once in a while, I get caught up and I trip in my own words. I'm like, what's up with that? Probing questions. So hey, but curious, tell us if you would, what is the book?
So it is a memoir. It's a straight up memoir.
Oh, okay.
I felt like after my husband suddenly passed away in September of 21, so just over a year ago. It's been a little bit longer than just over, but it feels like just over a year ago.
Yeah.
In sitting with all of that and healing from his loss, I really felt like God told me to write a book and that I needed to write this memoir. And I was on the phone with Meg and she's like, let's do it. And so borrowing from her faith, I jumped in, right? But I felt like we were in a unique position. As I said earlier, culturally, we were riding that wave coming out of Nazarene's not necessarily fundamentalism, but it's more fundamental than
conservative for sure, right?
Very conservative. And my husband, he was a farm boy from Iowa, and our bent was definitely more conservative. You know, back in the 80s, like conspiracy theories and things like that. And we started homeschooling. And so just that whole journey of like morphing those mindsets and those perspectives and what does it take to like open your heart up to different possibilities? And how do you actually, in a way, kind of challenge what you believed your whole life? It's like your identity, like those core beliefs, right? How do you bring those out of your subconscious and actually work with them and soften to be able to have an open hand and not fear that you're going to be, doomed to hell if you question some of those more embedded doctrines in a way.
For sure. Yeah.
Right. So I just felt like and we had 10 children, homeschooling, 10 children and homeschooling. The 10 children is part of the book because it was a covenant between God and I. I felt like he invited me into a covenant to have 10 children. So that's woven into the book as well, navigating that. And it's not about our kids, so there's not a lot of parenting in it. I intentionally had it be more about my husband and I, our relationship with one another and with God, and our relationship together with the church. But it's straight up a memoir.
Okay. Well, that's really interesting. It's as you're talking, I'm kind of trying to get my head around 10 kids, by the way. My wife and I had 4. John has 3, but we had 4, and people used to look at us like, really? Seriously, 4? Like you know how to make that stop, right? And I'm like, really? We almost had 5. Take with that. We loved having a full house. I mean, it was a good deal. But and actually, weirdly enough, John and I have a tenuous connection to the Nazarene Church, which you probably don't remember, John, because Kara went to a Nazarene school.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
My baby sister, who's 9 years younger than me, 10 years younger than John, went to kindergarten and first grade, I think, at a Nazarene school.
That's right. I forgot.
And then they thoroughly pissed my parents off and they left. So,
well, what's weird about my connection to the Nazarene Church, which is just completely bizarre, was at the time when Nat and I were younger and going to church, the Nazarene Church had a basketball court.
Oh, that's
which
right.
No other church in this area had anything like that. So the Nazarene Church had a gym. So there were times where we got to go and play basketball at the Nazarene Church because our church that we went to didn't have that, right? Didn't have that kind of cool stuff. So the Nazarene Church was the cool place to go play basketball. And that was that. So instantly when I hear Nazarene, that's my memory is
I forgot about that.
Getting to go play basketball in the gym. And I believe and Vacation Bible School.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we went to Vacation Bible School.
No,
it was,
100%. I guarantee.
Had the big gym, had the big space for it. So I actually have fond memories of the Nazarene Church. I don't align with a lot of their beliefs anymore because
you don't align with anyone's beliefs anymore, John.
This isn't church, right?
This isn't.
I have a lot of fond memories. I don't, because I don't really remember being like super preached at the Nazarene Church. Where
that was the beauty of Vacation Bible School, though. I mean, there were felt boards and there was snacks and there was game time. It was a blast. I mean, it was where our parents took us. If they were strategic about it, they could keep us occupied for 3 or 4 weeks of the summer. Just dropping us. And I did the same thing to my kids. I'm like, who's having VBS this week? Oh, you're going there. But we're not Presbyterians. You might be by the end. It doesn't matter. Okay. But no, we have, John's and my religious history is it's convoluted, because my parents were sort of in and out of church. And so we had anything from a very conservative covenant church, which I don't know if you're familiar with covenant church.
I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
So very Scandinavian, right? Very white bread, very Scandinavian, Norwegian, maybe I think actually.
And Norwegian. So we got the pickled herring and the lefse. I truly miss the lefse. That's one thing I do miss. That was good stuff.
But then we from there we went to sounds like what you described, not a full blown charismatic, but so Foursquare is kind of charismatic-ish. They're like Pentecostal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's definitely that sense of
so like charismatic adjacent.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't go into a typical Sunday service and see those things on full display, right? They spoke in tongues, but they weren't going to be broadcasting it. But and then I went full Pentecostal later, But word of faith and all. So we've kind of woven ourselves in and out of this stuff, and eventually completely out of all of it. But because I'm a little bit over it. So when you talk about, let's just the title of the book, "Kissing with Eyes Wide Open." So there's something about relationships and about, does the church figure into that as far as like how you conceived of relationships?
Yes.
Maybe if you could expand on that. What's that?
Yeah. So
what's that about?
Yeah. What's that about?
I'm sorry. I'm on a roll.
When we got married, we had a vision of that our marriage was a covenant marriage, and we were making a covenant between one another, till death do us part, but also making a covenant with God. And we envisioned that we were making a covenant with the body of Christ. And the idea of community was so embedded in our spiritual DNA. It was kind of the first conversation that Johnny and I had where we realized that we have more in common with each other than with most other people. So we were talking about J. Richard Foster's book, Celebration of Discipline, and he was talking about community, Christian community. And so we had this long conversation about, what is that, and envisioning what that could be. So when we were first married, we bought a house with another couple, and we brought in homeless people, single, mostly women, college aged. So kind of a dorm room for 4 or 5 women that lived there. We had a single woman that was homeless. She was homeless. We brought her in off the street. She lived with us for about a year. So this whole idea of living together, a Christian community, was very embedded in our value system. And so how do we walk that out?
Nat and I were raised in an area that had this place called the Lighthouse Ranch. So it's very this is I first of all, I'd have to ask you when you got married. So I don't know if we're talking about
81.
81. Okay, so
83. I'm
so
sorry.
I was born in 1970. Nat was born in 71. So we are the product of the Jesus movement. Our parents became Christian. My mom was raised Christian. My dad was pseudo-raised Christian, but really came to a connection through the Jesus movement. And there was a place here called the Lighthouse Ranch that kind of did sounds like what you're doing. It was a space for homeless people kind of not really connected to really any place, right? These are former hippies, specifically in that era that had found Jesus and kind of moved to Northern California, looking for a connection to earth and to connection to community. But what seemed to be an underlying issue, and I think even probably might be more for you, and you're going to you answer this, is so bringing people into your home as opposed to bringing people into a place called the Lighthouse Ranch, where they were set up with dorms. Did you ever get any kind of pushback by having specifically a lot of females in your household? Was that even an issue with the church? Because I could see how that could be or couldn't be, right?
Well, our home was, at that time, our church was meeting in a school for Sunday morning, and all of the other gatherings that we had was in our home. We had a large living room, so our home kind of was the gathering place. No, we didn't get a lot of pushback from people from the church or from people. Even the one neighbor was a little bit standoffish, but other people in the community were not. We didn't get pushback from them. The challenges that we have are more the interpersonal relationships inside the house and what it's like to live with. I mean, right. You've got a couple of kids, right? How do you navigate life, especially as your children get older? You have, adults in the house. So you're talking a household with maybe 12, 15 adults. There's a lot of dynamics there that you have to navigate.
Yeah,
all the way from be careful what you flush down the toilet, right? To who's doing the dishes tonight, to some of the gals that we had living with us had some addiction problems. And at that time we were kids. I mean, I didn't have training in prayer ministry or counseling or anything like that at that point. So kind of we were in the deep end of the pool and didn't know how to swim with some of those issues.
Yeah, it seems like, though, that the people that we've talked to who have put themselves in a situation like you did, coming from a place of having the right heart, almost kind of was better than the training in a lot of ways. Obviously, the training came along after the fact because you realize, okay, I need to understand what's going on, specifically with people with addiction or people with certain issues. But it seems like people who came from where you're coming from with this heart to serve actually had a better understanding of how to serve, as opposed to someone who's coming up from a more clinical side and then kind of learning to be more loving, if that makes sense.
Right. I would totally agree with you. It's almost like parenting.
Right.
Like you can go to somebody who has a lot of good ideas about parenting, but if you really want solid, actionable advice, find somebody who's parenting the way you would like to emulate. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. And to your point, too, the deficits that we felt were part of what drew us into more training and more, learning more, because we had a heart to love and serve and do a better job and fill in some of those gaps.
Yeah, we just had a conversation with a gentleman named Gary Grant, and one of the things that came up in that was this idea of the larger the churches get, the lack of community, right? And so I feel like something like what you're doing is a way bigger. It's a better understanding of what this whole idea of church can be. Is this idea of I'm going to open up my home. Now, I'm not expecting everyone to have the same decision, but opening up our home, opening up our community, opening up whatever to allow people who are searching for a better connection to the divine or God or whatever you want to call it, to have this space, as opposed to, again, going to these mega churches of 10 to 40,000 people with no real connection.
Similar to Francis Schaeffer. I don't know if you're familiar with Francis Schaeffer and Delivery, right? The idea of delivery. Now, personally, I think that there's been a cultural shift, and it's not just in the church. I think that small town America, Andy Griffith, right? There was community, and it didn't even require church to have community.
Bingo. And
our culture has so shifted. So to be quite frank with you, that was in the 80s, and we created that. And we had, even after we left the Blue House, we had single people living with us, one a male, and then later a couple of different gals who lived with us. So for, I'm going to get the numbers wrong, but like 15 years from the time we were married until we had 6, 7 children, we had somebody living with us. So that would have been in like around year 2000, 1998, year 2000 was when we no longer had somebody living in our home with us. And it was us with, at that point, like 7 children. I have not been able to replicate what we had in the Blue House. I've not tried, but I don't think I could at this point. We had a home group, and the home group about 10 years was amazing. And I'm just now trying to start another home group. We've looked, when the church imploded, we were left without community. So this was the piece, and maybe this is a good part of the discussion. We found that the relationship that we had on the back end, when the church imploded and we looked back, it was like most of it was centered around we're all doing the same things. It wasn't a relationship of we have a heart connection and we just like to be with each other. But we just like everybody showed up to practice for the worship team. And so we're all friends and we're practicing for the Sunday service together. So it's almost like a community was centered around our activities rather than around our essence.
Yeah, exactly right.
It is right now, our culture is really hard from my perspective to find people that are even capable of connecting at that level. Is it Jim Wilder, and I don't remember who else on his board. The ministry is called Joy Starts Here, and he has 19 brain skills that are required for joyful connection. I think that we have lost some of those brain skills, that they're becoming almost obsolete, and we're just not able to connect.
I left the church in like 88, 89. I walked away. I didn't look back for, almost 25 to 30 years. And through a weird happenstance, which everyone who listens to our podcast has already heard, so I'm not going to rehash that story, but I stepped back into the faith. And one of the first things I did, I am a musician. I enjoy playing music. So as I stepped back into a church and I saw that I could fulfill a need within the church by adding myself to the worship team, one of the first things I did was I asked why we don't meet outside of church as a worship group, to talk and chat. And because I've had so many years of experience outside of the church, I had a few guidelines that I expected when we went someplace, right? If we were to go out to lunch together, right? And I was like, so these are the things we're going to not do. We're going to not make the waiter or waitress, or however you want to say it, the waitstaff, have to figure out how to cut up our bill into 20,000 pieces, right? Because that's what the church people always do, right? They create this scenario where they're above everybody else, and everyone else has to kind of work to their level. And the other thing I said was, we're going to tip, and we're going to tip well, because there's a lot of us here. And the sad part is it became a joke within the worship group that I work with, was that, oh, John's the guy who made sure that we figured out how to pay the bill outside of the restaurant before we went in. And that became kind of like this running joke about me, that I was so concerned about other people that I would make our job a little bit more difficult. And I was like, you don't tip by adding a track. You don't invite them to church,
right?
Right?
Hey,
what
do you mean?
But I think that's what you're getting at, is like we've lost this ability to be part of a community. So we've taken this whole idea of being, what's the word I'm looking for? We are in the world, but not of it, right? And
right.
We've taken it so far that we need to make sure that our glory shines to the point where it shines so bright that no one wants to be around us, because we're kind of blinding.
Glory, John. It's pronounced glory.
Glory.
Well, and what you describe is interesting too, because when my wife and I, our church didn't we've been a part of a couple of churches that did implode, but our most recent experiences have not been implosions. But our departures. We eventually left. But then we were sort of sitting around lamenting the fact that we don't have relationships with those people anymore. And it's because exactly what you just said, because those relationships were actually pretty superficial. Yeah. They were based on the fact that we were in the same space, that we were, part of the same little group, and we were doing the same things. And there were the people inside of those organizations where I had even a spark of an actual connection. I'm still friends with those people. But everybody else, once that other tenuous connection was gone, there was no relationship there. And I think you're right. I think there's that to me, if there's not just one, but one of the tragedies of the modern evangelical church is that it's that lack of depth of relationship inside of those structures. They have to be completely predicated upon, the fact that we all go to this church together, and even so, yeah.
It becomes a silo.
It does.
A silo and an echo chamber.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I described it in my book as not so much a hierarchy like a stratified up and down. It was more like concentric circles, and everybody fighting and clawing their way in to as close as they could to the inner circle. And there were a handful of people inside of there that you wanted to somehow, get influence with or be a part of. And that is what was sad was I don't think that people realize how antichrist all of that is.
I agree.
It's not just bad. It's not just unhealthy. It's actually the antithesis of what Christ preached. And yet it's so human, right? To fall into those patterns. I think it's understandable, but I do think that whatever church looks like moving forward, at least for guys like John and I, it's going to have to be something completely different. Just the thought of it triggers me at this point. So it's going to have to be something radically, radically different. But that being said, your experience with that implosion, and it doesn't really matter the nature of it, but in what ways did that kind of affect you? Did it affect you inside of your marriage? Did it affect or were you and your husband kind of on the same page? Like, no, we don't need any more of this, or did it create some issues?
Well, probably it didn't create tension between us necessarily. Okay. But I think the biggest tension was it was emotionally distressing. And so we were both very vulnerable to depression at that point and to kind of that existential crisis. Because this is a church, it was a church we planted nearly 30 years of our life have been poured into it. Our now adult children were in ministry in this church. We were doing family together in this church. So we're walking out. Our children are still in leadership positions. Okay, we also have a daughter who's married to a pastor's son. So we've got in-laws here too. And eventually they're going to have children and grandchildren. And how are we going to navigate this? So, a lot of it wasn't, my husband and I didn't have problems with each other at all. We were very supportive of one another, but we both had to really dig deep and process forgiveness and clarity and why did this happen? What did we do wrong?
Yeah.
Where was God?
There's a lot of soul searching that goes on and all that. Mm-hmm. Especially when, and I'm not sure if this is your experience, but my experience was, it was just such a letdown. You know what I mean? Like all of the promises that church had made to me my whole life, all just sort of one by one crumbled. And, probably one of the climaxes of that was when my daughter got really, really sick, and navigating that, with people who were sometimes less than sympathetic, sometimes just, they're very cavalier sometimes in their advice and just pray harder, just believe more, God's a healer. He heals all the time. Well, he didn't actually completely heal her. There were lots of questions about how that was going down. So I think our situation might be similar to yours. My wife and I never had any tension between ourselves about the direction we were going, but that didn't mean that it didn't put tension in the home.
Right. There's definitely tension in the home.
Well, and everything's shifting, right?
Right. We've been in ministry, between us, the equivalent of a full-time position. I think both of us doing probably a part-time So suddenly that's just gone. We're no longer leading worship. We're no longer. There was one thing I wanted to bring up as you were talking. I was thinking about where the tension I really felt was as a woman in like the whole thing with leadership and women in leadership. This was a theme that was throughout our marriage and throughout the church. It's like, how do I relate with the church as a woman and feeling like I had a disposition for leadership? So that is also woven through the memoir too. Our walk with that, and how do we navigate that, right? And I think I came to the conclusion after the church implosion, it was like part of it was on me, because I was looking for the church leadership to build a platform for me and to give me permission. And I was not actually, this whole time I'm touting, be rightly related to authority. And I don't think I was rightly related to authority. I think I had them up on a pedestal, and I was kind of a little bit of idolatry worship there, like, right? And I wasn't like really stepping into what God was calling me to do and to be, because I was in the confines of the culture of the church in a way. And I hadn't figured that out. So that was the piece after the church implosion where my husband and I had to kind of do that dance too. He was actually more, I guess you would say, progressive in terms of like pushing me out into leadership than I was comfortable. It was a lot safer for me to hide behind, but I'm a woman,
That is it's such a weird dynamic to me now. You know what I mean? I'll tell you this quick story. My wife and I were part of a church in Maryland years ago. I was in the military, so we bounced around a little bit, and we were part of a little church in Maryland that eventually became affiliated with Foursquare, which was weird. Should have been a red flag, but anyway, I was with a wife that we liked a lot, and every once in a while, she would fill in the pulpit, and we were okay with that. It's like she can preach once in a while. We were still my wife and I were raised pretty strict conservative fundamentalists, so she couldn't be the pastor, obviously. I mean, we couldn't have that. But from time to time, they would do a sermon together, and every once in a while, she would preach on her own. And I didn't really care for her preaching; it was probably as much my own bias. But anyway, the implosion happened because all of a sudden they switched places.
Oh,
and he set her in as the pastor, and he took a back seat. And holy mackerel, you'd have thought they'd just come out as like stark raving, universalists or something, or they'd come out as like affirming gay people or something. It was the vitriol was swift and severe, and that church lasted about less than a year. It tore itself to pieces. And mind you, we had other issues with them. They turned out to be very controlling people, and there was a lot of garbage going on inside of that church, but it left me with a lot of questions, and I left that church. We ducked out before the implosion. Like we were the rats, scurrying from the sinking ship. I looked at my wife and we were getting the hell out of here. I don't know where we're going. In fact, we didn't go to church for like 2 years out. I'm like, no more. That was crap. But the interesting thing was the whole implosion of that thing that was ostensibly centered around whether or not a woman could lead. And it led me down a path to do some real investigation and really do some soul searching, because I was one of those that had an issue with it. I really had, because it's hard to dispute the seemingly plain words of Paul.
Right. A woman should be silent, right?
Right. I mean, be silent. I will not suffer a woman to teach a man. It seems pretty cut and dry. But then when I moved to Texas, weirdly enough, I ended up going and getting involved with an organization called the Walk to Emmaus, which is Methodist. And it's run by the Methodist Church, but it's very ecumenical. Mm-hmm. And Methodists were ordaining women left and right.
Sure.
I don't think they're very fair to their female pastors, but that's a whole different question.
Right?
I think they overwork them and underpay them. But that caused me to go, well, listen, there's an entire denomination of people who read those scriptures differently.
Right.
What else might I have gotten wrong? And that really did crack open. What's really funny is it was my very, very fundamentalist conservative pastor who sent me on this walk to Emmaus, and then I came back from that going, I don't know about some of this stuff. But it really was the crack in the door, you know what I mean? That let me go, if I'm wrong about this, I might be wrong about a lot of stuff. And it turns out I was.
Which is very, very scary to be on the cusp of that and admit, what do I not know? Like, am I wrong about a lot of stuff? That is very scary.
Well, it's one thing to say, what don't I know? That I didn't have an issue. Like I find that to be a little exhilarating and something like, okay, what don't I know? It was less, what don't I know? It was more, what am I just dead wrong about that I thought I knew? And I guess that's part of not knowing, but it's different for me because it starts from, it's the difference between a place of wonder, like, okay, I just don't know. For example, trigonometry. Don't know a damn thing about that. I wonder what that's about. Maybe I'm excited to learn. And another to go, you thought you knew trigonometry. You've been doing it wrong. This is why all your answers are. And you go, oh crap, if I had that wrong. I did get to a place, I don't know if you would ever or have ever used the term deconstruction, but that's fairly in vogue these days. People are talking about it. And that was part of what kicked the door open for me. At first it was those questions, but I actually took a very active role. And that was my question to myself was, if I'm wrong about this, what else am I wrong about? Let's tear it all down and find out. And so I know some people's experience with deconstruction is not that, you know what I mean? Maybe it's the experience of a crisis or something that's happened that really just tests your faith. But mine was more, holy crap, there's just probably things I'm just wrong. And let's just take it all apart and see what parts are necessary. It's like I was thinking about building something when my wife maybe goes off and buys something at IKEA, which, by the way, if you're listening, stop it. Don't do it. Have you ever noticed that you come back with something from IKEA or someplace like that and you assemble the whole thing and there's pieces left over and you go, I wonder if those are necessary. That bookshelf's been standing for 25 years. Turns out they weren't. You know, how many pieces are we holding in our hand, like trying desperately to find a place to shove them into the structure, and there's just no reason for it. So anyway, I digress. So, but I love that. It's been a part of our history. I'm sure it has been for you too. Then the sort of working through that trauma.
Well, right,
and maybe you didn't even identify it first as trauma.
At that point, we had 10 children. Now our youngest was 2 years old. So 2 and 5. So those two weren't as impacted. So 7 children who were of an age to be really impacted. And a very wise person who kind of walked with me through the situation. The first Sunday we didn't go to church, he called and said, since you're not going to be sitting by the stained glass window, you want to hop on the phone? And we had a really good phone conversation. And he just coached John and I to say, each of your kids is going to deal with this differently because we have different, different redemptive gifts, different personalities, a different value stack. So for instance, one child might be offended at the injustice. Another child might be offended that people were hurt, not because it's not the justice thing, but it's more relationship things. Or somebody else might be offended because Jesus wasn't represented well and that hurt their heart. So I think, am I making sense? So each of our children had a different offense. And that was so helpful for my husband and I to have that perspective and realize, the things that are bothering me probably aren't bothering my kids. They've got something else going on that they need help with. Very, very helpful perspective. And it was true for my husband and I. We had different issues with it. Our offenses were different. I mean, there was obviously overlap.
So my children were raised outside of the faith because I left the faith at such an early age. I married my wife not connected to any kind of faith. My wife actually is an atheist. To this day, still is an atheist. On a good day, I'm agnostic.
We're praying for her, John. Still, let her know.
on any given day, I lean towards atheism just because it makes a hell of a lot of sense to me. But
right.
So I raised my children outside of the faith, and then, like I said earlier, there was a point where I stepped back into church. So my issue was kind of the opposite, right? How do I step back into church and not offend my children, who I've told have that the church is a crutch, God doesn't exist. How can I show them that I might be wrong, and I'm okay with saying I might be wrong, but I might be wrong on both sides. And so that was the hardest part for me, was to like not feel like a charlatan as I step back into some kind of connection to a God. So, and my wife likes to remind me that when I decide to do something, I'm 1,000% in. And so to the point where sometimes it's kind of annoying. So there was.
Did you expect other people to be in with you?
I didn't expect them to be in with me, but I expected them to acknowledge my process and accept my process, even though I told them that the process that I'm going through is something, say 3 years before I did the process, it was asinine and stupid. So then I expect them to just fall in line and not necessarily, I don't expect any of my kids to go to church. They are of an age where they can make their decisions. But I got deeply, deeply offended when they made fun of what I was doing. And that was my growing pains, was to get to the point where it's like, I gave them autonomy to be human beings. And then I got mad at them for being human beings. That was difficult. So, I mean, you're kind of maybe on the other side of that, where you're trying to figure out how this church implosion affects the kids, your children, but at the same time, you're trying to give them the autonomy to be their own person, right?
Right. The gift of their experience.
Right.
And to hold space for that without judgment.
Yeah. And so I held on to a lot of the church part of me, which says, yeah, exactly what you just said. So I'm going to judge them because they don't understand what I'm going through. They maybe kind of in a comedic way make fun of it. And then I get deeply offended, which if I had given them the space to be the adult children that they are and listen to what they're saying, some of that comedy, some of that joking around was probably more serious than joking. It was them reaching out to me and saying, yeah, but what about what you told me for the last 15 years? Right. Right.
They're processing. They're trying to integrate this new experience and figure it out.
Well, that's weird because so between the three of us, then we have three fairly distinct when, because my kids watched me pour my life into church, sometimes at their expense. And when that church turned on me, their process was weird. I mean, they were offended. They were mad at the church for what they perceived as injustice towards my wife and I. They were a little mad at us for allowing ourselves to be subjected to that, and how, so there were layers of spiritual trauma that we had to deal with, and honestly, to this day, I have 4 kids. 2 of them have zero connection to church. I think they would all, except for one. My youngest likes to say he's an atheist. I don't actually believe him. I just think he's a contrarian. But I've got one son who's pretty solidly involved in church, and he and his wife go often. And I don't know. That would have bothered me a few years ago because my children's activity or participation in church would have been really, really high on my list of things they needed. Really what I'm looking for these days is that they're good human beings, that they're raising good kids, that they have some spirituality, and we talk about it often, and they do. But I'm trying very hard not to put any sorts of expectations on what that looks like for them. I did that enough most of their lives. So, and they got to sit and watch and bear witness to, they all have, they have definitely strong opinions about the shortcomings and the failings of, institutional church in particular, just because they've seen it firsthand, how brutal it can be, and how damaging it can be. So, but it is what it is. But at this point in John's and my life, both, we find ourselves now in a similar place where we both kind of stepped out from the whole thing and are trying to think through, like, what other ways can we imagine community going forward that doesn't necessarily have to have anything to do with hierarchy and structure and all this other junk. But so I don't know if that is something that that you have thought about or wrestled with, but I'd welcome you.
Yeah, very, very much so. We continued to have our home group. It was just maybe a dozen people. We met and had a meal together and just visited one evening a week, every Monday night, opened our home. They just came in. So we continued to have that home group through the whole implosion. Actually had that home group in our home for an additional maybe 8 years after the implosion. I read a book about home church, and they said that for every year you had been in institutionalized church, you would have like a certain amount of time to like almost like detoxify.
Yeah, for sure. No, that sounds right to me.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
So when I did that calculation, it's like, well, we probably won't be doing anything for maybe 6 years a minimum, because our whole life, my whole life, I have been like steeped, not just in the church, but in ministry and in leadership. And in, if you talk earlier about that inner circle, like I was that pillar inner circle, and our family was, my family of origin and Johnny and I. So I'm going to digress just a little bit to get to the point. When we started homeschooling, of course, I had this vision that my kids would go to like Harvard. I had this really high expectation, and it was the cultural norm that well-educated children go to higher institutions of learning. They go to college, they get a great degree, and they have a career. Well, my children are all entrepreneurs. Well, not all, but most of them are entrepreneurs. They were born wired differently, and college was not a good fit for them. And as they were in high school, I had to begin coming to terms with the fact that my son's got a lawn care business. He's an entrepreneur. He's not even going to go beyond maybe junior college. And I had to wrestle that perspective of what success would be. And I had to die to my vision of this is success. And talking about deconstructing, in a micro way, I was deconstructing what successful education would look like. And I came down to this really a core value that I want all of my children to live into their own essence and highest potential. To where at this point, I feel like one of the most successful things that you can look at and see if I've been successful as a mom and as a homeschooling parent is that my children are so different. Like I have an MMA fighter and I have a worship leader an on-staff pastor, worship leader, an MMA fighter. I have children that have no connection to the church whatsoever. Like we have a huge spectrum of where my children are right now, and I'm really proud of it. So tying it back into what you were saying, I had to deconstruct what success was in terms of relationship with the church and relationship with Christianity. And I really had to allow my children to have their own experience with God, with the divine. Some of them call source, and I've come to use that kind of vocabulary because my coaching is I'm in the marketplace. I'm not in the church. I'm not working I'm working often with church people, but not in the context of the church. And when people come to me, we don't have a conversation like, well, are you a believer? Are you an atheist? That's irrelevant to me because I'm working with natural laws, I believe, of relationship that are universally true, whether you call yourself a Christian, a Buddhist, or an atheist, or whatever. This is how connection works. This is how marriage works. This is how parenting works. This is how your relationship with yourself works. So I had to deconstruct a lot of that because I felt like a failure. The first one of my kids that walked away from the church, I was devastated. And I felt like I really was a failure. And now I don't feel that at all. I feel like I really have had a lot of success.
It sounds like you facilitated them to each become the people they needed to become.
I believe that I have.
I would hope so. Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right? I have the same hope I have 4 kids, and they are vastly different from one another. All 4 of them. Yep. 3 of them went to college. 1, nope. Her path was different, and that's totally fine. I was never one that was like, I'm proud, of course, because I feel like I can take some credit for that, because 3 of my kids, they have college degrees. Why? Because they got, I made it a priority for them. And actually, as it turns out, this is like a conversation my son and I've had about privilege over the years, right?
Right.
They went largely because, remember when we prioritized that, it was an important thing in our home, and we were able to facilitate it. Not everyone can have that. That's, getting one of my kids to acknowledge that he is the beneficiary of any kind of privilege is like, because we weren't rich. That's not what that means.
Right.
It means college was never a question. If you wanted to go, we were going to find a way to send you. That's not everyone's option. But yeah, I'm like you though. I several years ago, I would have viewed them departing the church as a failure. And not that I'm trying, I'm not trying to push them one way or the other. That they have the freedom and feel free to choose how they want to choose. I'll take that as a badge of honor and as a success on probably mostly their mom's part, but they're our part of hopefully facilitating them to become who they are, and for that, I'm glad that on some level we stepped pretty far back from the church for a while, because I'm not sure we could have done that inside of those structures.
I think the very last thing I would want for my kids is for them to remain in a church out of a fear-based type of commitment.
Yeah, some kind of obligation or yeah. Right. But you know as well as I do. I bet you've been a part of enough prayer circles and things over the years that that's the topic of conversation a lot of times, isn't it? Please pray for my son. He's outside the church, and I'm worried for him. Because for a lot of folks, outside the church means on a grease skid to hell.
Right.
So
exactly.
It's like, well, if they're not in church, who knows what they're up to?
And if that is your perspective, I understand the request for that prayer. I get it.
Yeah.
But I feel like that perspective is really, this is a whole other conversation, but it's really fear-based. And
which makes it toxic.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting because the conversation we're having with you now, actually, don't you think, John, really dovetails nicely with the conversation we had an hour ago with Gary? Because there's a lot of these same topics because he wrote a book called Building Church as a Family, right, John?
Yeah.
And so his whole thing was, and you've brought up the word covenant multiple times, and that was the crux of his whole thing was church has become contractual.
Exactly.
It's all transactional. It's all based on, if you do your part, then I'll do my part. And if you, those aren't healthy relationships.
Yeah, not just with the church, but we're transactional as believers. Like if I do my part, God.
Right. If it's that way with God, why wouldn't it be that way with my spouse?
Well, and the problem is as we live our lives and life doesn't turn out that way, then the requirement of us is to hide our failures.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because if God didn't grant me these great gifts that everyone said at the church, if I just had enough faith that all this stuff was going to be handed to me, and now I'm living, 10, 15 years later, and nothing's been handed to me. So I have to pretend and live behind this facade. Right. Because God forbid anybody find out that I'm actually a failure, because that means I didn't have enough faith. God didn't give me his or her or their blessing.
It's your fault.
Yeah. And so you have to, it's the whole, it's the whole Facebook scenario, right? Where all of our friends only put up their greatest days ever. So you create a facade, you create a scenario where you live this perfect life, but in the shadows, in the darkness, you're lost.
And so you have to go into the transactional because that gives you a measure of control, and predictability.
Yes. Something you can quantify, right? Something you can grasp.
Yeah. And the best way to cover your failures is to point out other people's failures.
Well, that's also true. But I still enjoy that, John. I mean, let's be honest for a second. I really do enjoy pointing out your failures in particular.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But it is that I feel like we could go a whole other direction. I wish we had. Maybe we'll have to do this again sometime. But that because of what you said is that I don't think I overtly raised my kids. I don't even think we talked about hell that much or talked about punishment that much, but they got the message. You know what I mean? I mean, it was implied enough.
Right.
And if you're talking about from your perspective as a person who helps people in coaching with relationships, then you would know as well or better than anybody else that those can't be healthy relationships, right? Relationships that are built upon the transactional. Yeah, and either the promise of reward or the threat of punishment if these conditions aren't met. Especially, and then you get, I mean, it's one thing you get into the church side of it, and some of those consequences are severe. Like, wait a minute, I ate pork I ate meat on Friday, and you're going to burn me alive forever? It seems a little out of balance, God. but more importantly, I mean, the scriptures don't back it up anyway. I mean, obviously, those who fear have not been perfected in love. So we know that the Gospels refute this idea, but it still leeches its way.
It's the way it's read. It's the way it's read. It's like I call it drama. I have a whole paradigm around it, fear-based, and versus like empowered love looks very different than drama and fear. But in that sense, we end up almost making God into our image. Because,
absolutely. Well, because we're retributive, right? I think that's a very human thing to say, listen, you hurt me, I would really like to hurt you back. It takes us transcending sometimes those baser natures, in that we do that with the help of God sometimes to go, well, okay. But if we see God as retributive, then it's easy to excuse my own need for retribution. Well, because there's plenty of scripture to back up.
Yeah, we more than justify it.
Sometimes we encourage it, right? Well, I mean, most of the people that I know, I mean, I'll don't, not to get into the political, but a lot of my friends who are very conservative, who are pro death penalty, will cite the Bible as justification for, well, then God is pretty bloodthirsty. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. There's all kinds of call for. So anyway, not to get too deep into one thing, but that I like that the recognition that so much of what we've been given is very contractual, is very transactional in nature, and that I think you would agree. It's not a healthy.
It's not.
It can't be a healthy relationship.
We're often oblivious to it.
I think
we don't realize that's how we're relating to God, to other people, and even to ourselves.
No, I agree, man. I tell you what, I have enjoyed this tremendously. It's too bad y'all didn't know. She would have been great to write a chapter on your parenting deconstructed book.
Yes, you would have.
I bet that would have been a very interesting, because all of us have had, most of the people that I run around with in the circles we've all had kids, and some of us have raised them already and would like, oh man, just let me go back like 15 years.
Right.
You just do a few things,
So then so my youngest right now is 14 and my oldest was born in 85. So 30 something, 37, 30 some odd years, right?
Once they get over 20, you're excused from knowing.
Right? At my just not quite 40-year-old son and my 14-year-old son, and my parenting is like incredibly different.
Oh yeah. I catch all kinds of hell for that, by the way. I'm sure you do too.
a little bit. Although mostly they're grateful and they acknowledge that they watched us grow. They watched their dad and I say we were sorry. They watched us recognizing, the time when Johnny spanked our son until he broke almost. And he's the MMA fighter. He would never break. I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly.
But, Johnny comes out of the room. He's like, never again. And the older kids watch that and they're like, well, how do you change? Like, this is so embedded in our culture, the way that we disciplined our children. And they watched us steer that ship into new understanding, into growth, and in us facing our own, our own fear, our own failure, and facing it head on, and by grace and by commitment and covenant, finding a way to change.
Yeah.
Right? To grow.
Sounds like growth and maturity and all that other good stuff. hopefully by the time my kids are 30, they'll stop giving me crap because I beat the hell out of one kid and left the other ones alone. But I had a very similar experience where I'm like, I looked at my wife, I'm like, I am not doing that anymore. I don't care what the Bible says. I don't care what your preacher said. All of it's bullshit. I'm not doing it anymore. And we made a covenant. We're like, no more. There's a better way to discipline kids than what we just did. And none of my kids, to my knowledge, they don't discipline their kids that way. And that's the way. That's success to me. It's like, okay, learn from our mistakes. My wife and I were just doing what we thought God required of us, even though it was reluctantly. And even then, at some point, we're like, I don't actually care if this is what God wants because I'm not doing that.
Yep. Yeah, we hit that same wall.
Yeah. It'd be like, Abraham. I still wonder what would have happened if Abraham had told, God to go get bent and he told him to sacrifice Isaac. I think God would have been like happy, like nice.
That's an interesting thought. Yeah, I'll have to sit with that.
Sacrifice your son. Not going to do it. Oh, yeah. You saved me so much time, Abraham. Thought. Well done. Well played, sir. All right. That's a good enough. That's as good as any place to stop. Before I say anything else more heretical, but we have really enjoyed this. I thank you so much for
thank you very much
for hanging out with us, and I wish you nothing but success with the book. I hope it goes well. If you're listening, go buy the book, man. It's on Kindle. I just downloaded a sample of it.
Yeah, it's on Kindle,
and I'm super excited to finish it. Check it out. If you have anything like social media or websites, let us know. We'll put links to all that stuff in the show notes. And just again, continued success. And we appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.